this is a summary that I want to go over with you all this morning. And my mindset on putting this together, it includes some pre-storm information. So here with the outline of the review, some storm predictions and expected versus total rainfall accumulation and what we ultimately received, the post-storm impacts on island and throughout the county. I wanted to show some comparables with flood areas, sort of some ground truthing of what we saw on the ground versus the 2019 LIDAR data set that we have. So I've got some examples of that. And then an item on floodwater management on the island to acknowledge what we do proactively, reactively, and how we do it with the lagoon interconnectivity. And then the important part of it, though, is the post-storm after action reviews that we had towards the end of October with the different departments, including the club and their floodwater management support of our efforts in response. And then a couple of things on future policy considerations and then next steps. So looking at if you recall, on Sunday, September 15th, I sent y'all an email that morning where I acknowledged the amount of rainfall we had gotten over the last 24 hours, and then some observations from the club, from Adam Bachmeyer, in terms of lagoon levels and the water table in general, and where things stood. And then subsequently later that afternoon, we got the Sunday afternoon at 5:30, the National Weather Service briefing that acknowledged the rainfall amounts of 3 to 6 inches. And so that's what we were thinking. This additional graphic visual showed, 4 to 6 inches within our area here. And so then, as we know, Bald Head Island here, that orange it came up on us from Southport, Bald Head, and up to Carolina Beach and Southport, where we got 20 some inches of rain. And so, the big impacts to the island obviously was the flooding. Hardest hit areas were predominantly in areas of elevation between 5 and 7 feet of mean sea level, and I'll show you some examples of that. We had some challenges, but with our personnel, due to those flooding impacts and impacts on the mainland and the limited or the elimination of the ferry, we've had to find alternative methods of transport. And we were able to get over by sea tow and Tugboat USA from that Monday, the 16th, on through to the 23rd until the ferry resumed normal service. The other big issue was the wastewater treatment plant reaching a critical point of almost failure due to the infiltration and inflow. Just to acknowledge, those impacts on the mainland side with the roads that had gotten washed out on 211. This was 133, 17. This still is a problem, East Moore Street, and not exactly sure when that's going to get repaired.
Yeah.
But that was an issue for folks trying to get to the island. So when I talk about flood areas and the 2019 LIDAR data as examples along Stede Bonnet Wind, these areas right here, the reds are 5 feet and the blues are 6 feet. And so most of these areas, when we drove through, they were the flooded areas, right? Over here on Cape Fear Trail, a lot of this area here. Over on Horsemint, here sits that 10-inch intake to the 8th Lagoon. It's hard piped out to this emergency outfall to West Beach and the Cape Fear River. This is a 6-inch pump that we have hard pipe connection to the 12-inch pipe that runs to this emergency outfall.
Chris, can we attach any other pumps to that 10-inch pipe?
No.
Okay. Are we able to get permission to add in more pumps and more outfalls?
So that's still going to be a big part of the Lassie two stormwater planning project to evaluate. Because that was a big question was, or big criticism of, that the village should have gotten the water off much faster. And so,
20 inches is.
and let me say, I don't want to say criticism, observation. The observation of we should have gotten the water off much faster. And so is that a possibility, bringing in larger pumps and making new connections to the lagoon system and making new connections to the emergency ocean outfalls, because we have, two sets on West Beach and two sets on South Beach. And we've talked about South Beach in particular, opportunities for tapping into the 17th lagoon with another big pump and hard piping out through the other set of outfalls. But, so here is the black skim morning warbler area that was flooded out. And here's our 10-inch pump on Stede Bonnet at the 17th lagoon that's hard piped out to this emergency ocean outfall here. This is the other set that I was referring to, that there may be some opportunity to put something in up here with a pad and another 10-inch pump maybe, and hard piping through the common area out to this intake box here.
Back up just. So I noticed, between the hard pipe, coming out of Snowy Egret and the hard pipe that feeds from 17,
Yes.
there's on the south side of South Baldhead, there's a red area, a low-lying area. So the outfall on the left is gravity fed, right?
Yeah, there is no hard pipe connection to that castle.
There's a culvert, and if there's enough flood water that gets high enough, then we can use that one. The problem is it may not have been high enough for that to be effective.
Right.
Move that over to where there's a lower lying area where the intake would be more effective.
Right.
Should that be a consideration?
Yeah. So right now we have no culvert crossing. If the water doesn't flow, is not higher than the road and floods this out, then by gravity, we can't use it.
Right.
From Florence, it was so high, it was so deep that we did.
Yeah, got it.
With PTC 8, half the amount of rainfall, that wasn't the case. But to take advantage of this, from a force main approach, we've already been talking about adding another 10-inch.
Right.
Or to Jenny's question, the next, is there a 15-inch pump or whatever? But
Right, yeah.
question like that really need to have an engineer evaluate that. So the east end of South Beach, we know is has been prone to flooding, and again, it's those low-lying areas on the south side of South Baldhead wind through portions of Killigray Ridge, Flores Bluff, through Ballantrae, Seton, Dunedin, and Inverness. All these areas here, we saw floodwater, and a lot of that is driven, I think, hydrology. What's the word I'm trying to say? From a hydraulic point where it's this high dune ridge. You don't see it. It's not surface runoff. It's underneath, but it's all pushing down to these low-lying areas.
Got it.
Yeah, right.
So even as you pump, those areas are just going to refill until.
And so we just have to continue to pump, and then we get to a point where we pumped it down with those 4-inch diesel pumps, and they start sucking air. And so we shut them off for a period of time until it comes back up, and then we cycle it back on. And so there was times when folks would ride by them and then call and question, well, the pumps aren't running. Well, that was part of the reason. So, but this really was pronounced in Florence, and out of Florence, with our engineers at the time, we had discussed about options for outlets in this area. which we had said, cost benefit wise to put in additional emergency ocean outfalls. If we needed to, we could just cut through the dune. I don't know, that's still a question. Either way, the water's gonna be there. It's, do we cut through the dune and let it flow out by gravity versus pumping?
Did the homes along there have grinder pump issues?
The homes in this area,
Yeah, Seaton and,
yes,
We did pump them.
yeah. We had 4-inch at one time, 2 4-inch pumps. We were going back and forth through here. It seemed to work from Inverness back to Seaton was that 6 foot, these 6 foot or 5 foot areas. At the very east end, along Station House Way, you can see these areas here that would collect or groundwater table would rise up and flood those areas.
it was collecting.
Yeah.
The heavy rain.
The
It was-
circle at the Shoals Club entrance.
Mhm. And it took a long time for that to drain out.
Yeah, I just want to show the Cape Fear Station PUD area because this just gives you an example of why you don't see much in issues down there. Because everything is above that 7 foot. There's the area of Federal Road that we were dealing with, of course. But predominantly Cape Fear Station is not a problem. And I just pulled this for folks to see again, sort of the hydrogeology of the island. This was from the ARM project, the ARM study that we did after Florence that Jim Cornett presented. It gives a graphic illustration of what we look like with our aquifer, Cape Fear and the Atlantic Ocean, and the semi-confined aquifer. But this area here, is that area there, right? And all these low points on the island are where you're gonna see, is where you see that flooding.
Chris, may I add something?
Yeah.
The other point I'd just like to make too is, you'll recall, people had commented towards the end about how low the lagoons were and that we kept pumping. Well, we had to affect those 5 to 6 foot mean sea level areas. We had to keep pumping, even though it's high there, because what Chris is saying, the groundwater moves around so much. So if you drain it in one area, it finds itself in another area. To get those 5 and 6 foot elevations, we had to keep pumping it. And to do that was to slow down the flow to the wastewater plant, because we still had grinder pumps that were in those areas. And that was my concern about flow to the plant. We had to keep pumping, even though people were seeing gains at the lagoons, we weren't gaining enough on the plant to stop yet. So that's why we kept doing it.
To your point, I got back to the island on the Sunday after and drove by the bypass lagoon and it looked empty. Drove by the lagoon on 8 and it looked empty. I'm like, oh my gosh, we ran the pumps too long. 2 days later, they were almost back to, a foot or two down from full pond. I'm like, whoa. So fascinating how that happens.
Yeah. Yeah, we gotta be careful. I was nervous. I'd never seen that quite extreme in our pumping actions
Yeah.
and the reaction of the water table so drastic.
So quickly.
Right.
That's the thing
It
that,
also raises the question, if you had bigger pumps and pump faster, the groundwater is only gonna move from area to area
Fair
so
enough.
fast.
Yeah.
So you'd out pump that water, would you?
that's a great point.
Look at
Yeah.
that. Not only pipe size, what we can get out now according to the pipes we currently have, but how long does it take the water to move around the island subsurface to get to one point to another? That's a huge question.
So the North Carolina Byways thing, and and you just read the slide, so maybe you can remember better than I did. But they were talking about sea level rise, but also on the East Coast, particularly in this area, we also have a groundwater rise. Is that pretty, simplistically put, kind of, so that it's not just sea level rising, but it's also groundwater issues. For the East Coast, particularly the Southeast, North Carolina. How that applies to Bald Head, I don't know, but that's just kind of
Has a strong
another
influence here.
interesting thing.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, JP, but in my line of thinking, the faster you move the bulk of the water off early on, let that stuff settle. That may mean you can keep the pumps off longer till it resettles. But whenever you need to move it, you move it more quickly. And that, I think, helps the wastewater treatment plant.
10-inch pumps never shut off till the very end.
Yeah, right.
We ran them seven 24-hour periods.
Oh.
Monday to
So that's something to
Sunday.
think about.
So floodwater management on the island, I just wanted to acknowledge with this slide, sort of what we can do in proactive and preparedness with our bypass lagoon here at the sixth lagoon, 6th and 7th fairway on out to Bald Head Creek. And that on Sunday before the storm, we had minimal flow of the lagoon water of that weir gate, so it was less than 3 inches. And when I talk about the weir gate and the seal, I'm talking about this, I know this is a top-down photo, but this is the gate is open, it's lowered and it's open so the water can flow out, right?
Yeah.
So here on the 16th of September, when we got to the island, the water was almost at the lid. So that lagoon was full. And by the 21st, by way of this, so that water is moving from the club side lagoon system out to the creek. So from the 16th to the 21st, if you look at these bolts as a measure to gauge how much water we lowered the lagoons in that period of time. That's in response to the amount of rain.
Yeah.
Remember, preparedness, proactive, we didn't have any water on the island.
Right. Right.
Once we got the water, this is reaction. This is responding to that. In addition to other areas with force main pumping.
Yep.
And just to acknowledge here that when people ask about why can't you pump before the storm? Well, the state, we have to show the state that there's a clear risk to public health and safety. And we don't have that obviously before the event. But when it happens, then we respond and we recover. And just to acknowledge, our focus of initial response is to remove the flood water off the island to reduce the subsurface water table to allow for standing surface water to infiltrate into the ground. And then we continuously observe the lagoon levels, our coordination with the club, and through the lagoon interconnectivity of the island, which this map shows here, where, the golf course irrigation distribution system is here and the irrigation lagoon, and where they can move water from here in a variety of directions. But what we do with the club is we're either moving water off the island to the bypass lagoon, or we're moving water off the island to South Beach, or we're moving water off the island to West Beach and the Cape Fear River. And all that done with those 10-inch pumps, which maximizes our effectiveness and our efficiency to draw that water table down as fast as we can. It benefits the whole island.
Mhm.
Chris, I don't know if there's some potential, when the club does the renovation of the golf course, whether there's potential to work out some other measures to help the island.
Yeah,
Stay in touch with Adam.
yes, and I have a few points in here, when we met with Adam and went through this, but, one thing I wanted to show with this visual is just to acknowledge when folks say, well, can't we just open up the ocean outfalls and start pumping? Well, this is the after effect of what happens when we open the outfall. Notice the outfall and how low it is below the peak of the frontal dune here. That's probably about 18 feet up. You can see it in this aerial imagery here where it was flowing out. And just to show, this was what the oceanfront shoreline looked like in 2003 when these were installed. That's where they're at there. But I thought this would be a good visual to show. So water's only coming out that one side because we only have a hard pipe connection to that one pipe.
And then did we bring tractors in to smooth that out after the fact?
So we're working with the dredging contractor who coincidentally will be here and they'll be pushing sand in to fill that back in. And we have had discussion about going to the state. Remember, we got a variance from the Division of Coastal Management, the Coastal Resources Commission to put these in 2001. You can't just go out there and put this stuff in. It's not permittable. So we had to get a variance and they approved it. But what we will look to do is look to get, see if we can get a variance to extend that pipe further seaward. We're still gonna have to dig down below grade because it'll be about 7, 8 feet below the shoreline grade, but it's not under that dune.
Right.
Right. So it doesn't keep disturbing that dune.
Right.
So moving into some of the after action review, I don't want to go through and read through every one of these, but just maybe acknowledge some of those within our general comments. Internal communications, this storm event and what we did, I think was a good learning lesson for newer leadership with Jay and JP and a lot of folks that hadn't been with us and having to respond to this type of event. So there was some increased need for added communication internally. So they could get a good understanding of how we do this for the future. Private pumping related issues, that's something I'll touch upon in another slide. The mayor will recall ICE vehicles in our state of emergency. We restricted no new ICE vehicles coming to the island through our recovery period. Having said, there was discussion, perhaps we should have restricted any ICE vehicle movement on the island because they got in the way. So that was a problem. With issues with the wastewater treatment system and potential failure, there was the question of, at one point, there was a question of should we amend the state of emergency and require a voluntary evacuation, which would be mandatory for non-island residents. Had we done that though at the time, how would we have gone through that in getting folks off the island because the ferry system wasn't right?
Exactly.
And then on top of that, how would they
couldn't
get out
off
of,
roads when they got over
how
there.
would they get out?
Get there, yeah.
So these,
Got to the mainland. How are they gonna get home?
right.
Yeah.
These were, challenges and moving to public services and utilities. Number of things we've discussed already, review of our pump inventory, additional needs for future events, larger pumps. We're moving with the Lassie 2 study, look at additional hard pipe connections to other emergency ocean outfalls. I think JP's guys, they came up with this quote, pain points. And what the pain points are areas where we had to sort of go back over and over and we had to manipulate and run discharge hose that took hours and hours. And so those are things we're going to be looking at to improve with putting hard pipe in the ground and putting more intakes, maybe in crossovers underneath the road. So we're not having to put those obnoxious ramps, particularly on the main thoroughfares of North Bald Head and
South Bald.
Edward Teach and south. And then the obvious, our grinder pump situation for improvements to mitigate infiltration. With our public safety and our emergency operations center and incident command support, the challenges with 911 calls in flooded areas, identified need for high water vehicle for use when needed. Even though we didn't get any specific non-life threatening, or we were getting requests for what we considered non-life threatening transport, like, can you get me to the ferry? And then in other places, and then as you observe, people were out, they were finding a way to get around the island. And,
There were a lot of people riding bikes too, and they were just stand to ride the
Right.
water.
yeah, but, obviously if there was a life-threatening situation, and we did respond to a 911 call down one road one evening with one of the pumper engine trucks that was nervous that we were gonna flood that thing out, but, this notice.
Crowd control of the maritime market, what was going on there?
So that was the day when we were working with Claude to open up the market so folks could come get provisions.
Yeah.
And so we coordinated that to have public safety there in case anybody got unruly or
Got it.
obnoxious, and that worked out
Fighting over the
well.
last loaf of bread and stuff.
Right. And that worked out well, good coordination. The notice to day trippers and a recommendation not to come to the island, that was something that the village, we coordinated with transportation as they recognized seeing people wanting to come to the island. And that's when we agreed, like, the word is, no, this is not the right time to come to the island for obvious reasons. So they started to tell those folks, if you don't live on the island, you're not coming over. And there may have been some, misinterpretation of that amongst the real estate community at one point, that it wasn't, we weren't saying that if you had a rental, you couldn't come over. We're saying you're just coming for the day.
Right.
If you had a rental,
Right.
then come. I mean,
Would it be
Different
helpful,
food.
so when the island's under a state of emergency, right, we can say day trippers can't come, right?
I think we have that. If we had formally wanted to identify that, we could have.
Yeah.
It's just how do you,
About having pre-paged placards that we could make and hand over to Bion and say,
well, I don't know if I want to get that formalized with it. I mean, I just, I think the way we handled it worked. I think the bigger question was, and I thought you were going to go in this direction with a state of emergency and calling for a voluntary evacuation.
Oh.
Because if you do that, then that gives, if people have purchased the insurance, they can at least recoup their,
Mhm.
in this instance, we didn't call a voluntary evacuation. And so if they were told not to come and they didn't get the insurance, well, then they were just out.
Then they were out.
But all these things evolve and are different with each event.
Sure.
These would be discussions and decisions that council would need to make. As part of the EOC operation, for future reference that.
Chris, you said you were going to address private pumping. Is that another slide?
Yeah.
Okay.
With development services and private pumping, property owners' expectations, relative to their ability and need to pump their property. In this instance, we were dealing with requests and in certain situations, there were people that were pumping that didn't request. And we were getting calls from neighbors that they were upset and they were saying, hey, they're pumping onto my property and they're causing further damage. What are you guys going to do about it? the village? Or, you know, did the village approve them to pump? Because it's negatively affecting my property. So, you know, historically, 20-some years ago, you had 300-400 houses on the island that were vastly spread out. You could do things like that. I think we're getting to a state of development on the island that you don't have that. And that's something that I think we need to talk further to set. And maybe include council, legal. I know they have some thoughts on that in terms of liability.
I heard comments about private pumping, and that's why I wanted to make sure we have it on our list of things to consider.
Comments about wanting to pump and couldn't, or
Well-
people who pumped and impacted.
It was both. There's
I heard
a full mixed bag.
Yeah.
Yeah.
People saying the water's not getting out of here fast enough. I'm gonna take it into my own hands. And other people saying, oh, they're making a mess in my yard or on the road, or, you know. Pumping directly onto the beach, is that allowed? You know, going over the dunes onto the beach. A lot of questions like that.
Okay.
Other things we recognize for future development of unbuildable lots and the village's role in approving new construction in these flood-prone areas, meeting building code, FEMA flood zone requirements, permitting of garages and crofters in these areas, these flood zones between 5 and 8 feet above sea level. You know, part of the Lassie 2 project to revisit our stormwater management ordinance and review that. We had that ordinance includes things like the private pumping. Another big thing we want to talk about is discussing with the Bald Head Association and the ARC some of these concerns with future development on private property and where these garage and crofters are going. Between the village and the association, what can we do to have any effect on for future development? And then with communications and education, I think an idea Karen and I had is we consider creation of a stormwater management webpage on the village website where we can put a lot of this information to try to educate island residents on how stormwater from these types of events is managed. And I think in this last one, we recognize, you know, an early establishment of trying to get, if we have new information, you know, an AM and a PM update. Although I know Karen's a one person managing a lot, but
Well, and I heard a lot of compliments on your
I did too.
presentations.
Absolutely.
Lots of good stuff.
Yeah.
But I'd be careful about that 500 to 1,000 year event. I know that's terminology that's used, but around here it's about a 4 or 5 year event.
right. Yeah. And then last with the club, we met with Adam and had a real good meeting to touch on things there. And just to acknowledge, you know, here with number one, you know, they had some initial issues with their the piping with the irrigation distribution system. And as Adam described it, areas where pipe was located that wasn't, they got undermined by runoff and cracked. Like, I guess some areas around some of the what's the sand traps? Right. Where the soil was loose. So there were a handful of areas that they had to turn the system off, locate those leaks and repair them before they could fully engage dump valve on 7. But you know, it was quickly resolved, but with the maximum gravity flow we had through the bypass lagoon, that wasn't a critical issue at the time. Right. But Adam and his guys quickly got it fixed, and when we needed to dump, they were dumping continuously. The 15 lagoon operations worked well.
Am I remembering correctly that 15 was not pumped to 16 immediately because 16 and 17 were already flooding.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. We talked about, the initial volume removed and concerns by that Monday, the 23rd, and how much we had emptied, but did it recharge? So, we talked about the rain garden there on the number 14 lagoon and the related flooding issues there. And then we talked about pain points for future improvements, potentially impacting the golf course, and with their efforts for club improvements and major renovation, I think that's probably 26, 27,
27.
27. Okay.
The architect said 2 years before he can get to it.
Yeah. And then just the last one, there's some concerns that were expressed that the golf course lagoons were flooding adjacent properties, and I think that was a misconception. It's the water table rising, water from above stacking up. And looking at future policy considerations on private pumping and what we've traditionally allowed. And, just as an example of, this particular property here, based on the way it was designed and built and the LiDAR and the elevation where it's flooding, that they had hired a contractor to run hose all the way down to the beach and cross South Bald Head Wind. And even that crossing, I was very concerned at one point in time, the way it was done, and had an incident with a golf cart that went over it. It didn't flip, but that really, I thought, like, I don't know if we should be allowing that. So that's an example. And, this practical and realistic expectation of what private pumping is achieving for a lot of these folks when they're using a 2-inch trash pump relative to the village's actions and capabilities with 10-inch pumps, 6-inch pumps, 4-inch pumps. So just taking all that into consideration, I figure maybe during the retreat, if we want to have more conversation on that.
I had some people question about the pumps that were donated as a result of the Florence fundraising.
Yes.
And I think it'd probably be good to get information out there about where those pumps were located and how well they worked.
Those pumps worked really well. We actually ordered another one. We bought 2 and some ancillary equipment. We had some funds remaining left, and the deal was that it be used to pay for tangible to support pumping. And we had a little left over, and we budgeted for an additional pump, and we used the remainder of those funds for that pump. So we used them in all over.
Relative reference, whenever in the past events, we were talking about the 4-inch diesel pumps, those are the 2 pumps that were purchased for that money. So we mentioned it lots in the notes a lot.
Okay, I think something public would be useful.
Yeah, and when you come to your final presentation, list the inventory we had, pre-contributions, and then separate column, and then contributions led to these additions. So therefore we had a total of these number of pumps by size. And so it's very clear and visual. People can see the value or the benefit from the contributions they made.
Yeah. So that's pre-Florence.
We got those after Florence.
Right, but we're saying he wants the list pre-Florence before those pumps were bought.
Yeah, so what pumps did we have during Florence? What sizes?
Oh,
That's one column. Next column is, and because of the contributions we received,
gotcha.
you added one here or 2 here, and then so now we have a grand total list. All were used in Tropical Storm A. Potential tropical. And actually, JP, if we had X number of pumps in Florence and we, the village, purchased some additional ones without contributions, that separate column, and then the third column with the pumps we bought with contributions.
We only purchased the 2 4-inch diesels with the donated funds.
Got it. Then just 2 columns.
Yeah.
Perfect.
We've always had the 2 10-inch pumps, 2 6-inch pumps. And we may have had a 4-inch or
We had gas 4-inch pumps.
we had gas
And 3-inch pumps.
and 3s.
And having that whole list of inventory on one chart, I think would be good for people to see.
Just to conclude, next steps, identify immediate short-term improvements to the system. Just mentioning the purchase of additional pumps and supporting equipment. And to your point, Scott, anything we can do immediate, we'll work on that. And then those pain points and anything hard piped, as an example, down Dowager Trail to the Castle Box.
What is the castle box?
When you turn down Dowager and you go down and where the road forks, there's that concrete castle box.
Okay.
It's there,
Got it.
collection box. That's where we pump from Dogwood on the other side of Stede Bonnet, all that area. We pump it down there and there's a pipe that feeds it into the sixth lagoon.
Okay.
I'm initiating the planning project with Withers and Ravenel. Future council policy discussion on private pumping. And prepare and submit a floodwater management discharge plan to NCDEQ. This go around, when I reached out to DEQ to let them know we were opening up the outfalls and this and that, he said, we don't have a management discharge plan from you all. And I just acknowledged, I know, we'll get you one. So that didn't mean we couldn't do it.
Right.
Ours was going to be very detailed.
Yeah, you'll be
He's got
surprised.
a lot, so
Yeah.
he provided the one from Oak Island that's 2 pages.
Yeah.
They don't do a whole lot.
When Representative Miller and Senator Rabin were here, they talked about, once we shared with them our stormwater management plan, they're like, their heads exploded. We've never seen anything this complex and complicated before.
All right. It's a lot of work over the years. So that concludes,
My presentation.
yes,
One last thing, Chris, I
yes.
hate to complicate matters, but we learned a lot in Florence. And they're the changes we made post Florence that helped us in this one. I mean, you talked about the bypass lagoon outfalls, but you didn't talk about the fact that those were put in after Florence. So we were able to move somewhere between 2 to 3 times as much water through the bypass lagoon,
Good point.
right?
Yes,
Having that in there so people understand that we learn after every event, we make modifications and we're going to continue to learn. We're never going to get this perfect.
Right.
Things are going to change, but we're going to get better
Quicker,
and quicker.
more efficient.
Yep.